Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Better Call Saul Season 3, Episode 1. They're calling this one Witness. And kicking things right off, we have a really interesting scene with Chuck as our cold open for this show. He's sneaking around his house, he's checking the latches on the doors, he's looking out the blinds, and it almost seems like he's going off on a little bit of a paranoid tear here. Just like as you're feeling your way into this, it strikes me that this is not the type of behavior we normally see from Chuck. And he seems very nervous. He's again checking the locks on the windows, like being sure that everything is snug and tight, like a bug in a rug. And then he comes across this guy sitting here playing solitaire with a deck of cards from a casino that's had a hole punched in it, and maybe interesting little commentary here on cheating. You know, that there's always that the house is always trying to keep you from swapping cards out. Regardless, this is amazing setup because this pays off in this episode, but at the moment that you see it, when you first watch this getting set up, it puts so many questions in your mind and really layers in this, and we're already confused, right? At least I was. What is Chuck's plan? He's got this tape. We know he has no direct legal course that he can take with this tape. And it's interesting, I was just listening to the Better Call Saul Insider podcast where Vince Gilligan talks about the series, and it's fascinating to know that the writers coming into this season also did not know what Chuck was going to do with this tape. Like, they wrote this cliffhanger, they're like, all right, he's got this tape, we get to go and like rest our brains for a little bit and not think about all the plotting to Better Call Saul, and just left this plot point hanging, had to come back and construct something for Chuck to do with this tape, because as we have learned, and as I'm sure the writers learned from research and having people look up what's legal to do with the tape that you've taken of somebody and what the Nevada laws are, you can't just take it to court. And weaving all of these threads together and setting up this, a web that Chuck is making, and for the viewer as well, from a storytelling perspective of showing all of Chuck's steps setting up this thing, but not telling us why he's doing any of it, is what makes this show so brilliant. It sets these things up. There's always a reason for it. It's never just some random, like, well, that was weird, well, moving on to the credits. Every single thing serves a purpose. Back to Mike. He's following the tracker. He follows the guys who swapped out the tracker go, and they're hanging out watching. Assumably, they're just on Mike duty. The guy comes and picks up the tracker from them. I assume this is, as we find out later, he's connected to Los Pollos Hermanos and ultimately Gus Fring. I assume the idea here is that this guy's a buffer between the business of this drug empire that Gus Fring has set up and Gus Fring himself. So he's a go-between. Gus Fring wants plausible deniability. If this guy gets captured, or if these other guys get captured, they're pointing the finger to him. They're not pointing it at Gus Fring. So Gus Fring has fewer points of contact. He can invest in people that he can trust as his inner circle, and then have them deal with the lower rung, rabble-rousing people that maybe you couldn't handle and trust not to go to the police with who you are, or if they get caught or whatever, not to turn you in. But Mike follows him. He sees that he goes to Los Pollos Hermanos. He sees him go in. Mike obviously can't follow him because they know who Mike is. Like, Mike knows that they're looking for him. They've tracked him to this point. He can't just waltz in and be like, "Hi, I'm Mike Ehrmantraut. What's up with this tracker, guys?" I mean, they're going to see him coming a mile away. Or at least there's a very distinct possibility of that. So he's outside, and the reveal, like, you know it's gonna happen. There's several times in this episode where you know something's gonna happen. You're sitting outside, Mike outside this restaurant. He's watching through the rearview mirror with his binoculars. You know it's Los Pollos Hermanos. At least I did. I was like, it's it. That's it. It's got the red. We know where we are. But they hold off anyway. It's this tantric exercise of just teasing you out. You know, we're just following Mike. He's just doing his thing. You're like, it's Gus Fring. It's Gus Fring. We know it's Gus Fring. It's Los Pollos Hermanos. Get to it. And they finally do that great crane shot up as Mike's pulling out to the sign and just like reveal it just a little bit at a time. And you see the whole chicken. Amazing stuff. Really, really great stuff. We get to cut then to Jimmy and his continuing escapades, and he's a little bit more mundane right now. He's hiring a secretary, him and Kim both, and this, you could argue that this scene is not super plot relevant, right? Like I don't think they're setting something up here as far as the secretary worked at the MDV or the difference between the MDV and the DMV, and that's going to be like real important later on. Maybe it is, could be wrong. I'm not necessarily discounting that possibility, but I think the overall point of this scene, the reason that it's here more than just we hired a secretary, is showing that there's this divide between Kim and Jimmy, right? Kim is, as we saw in the last episode, still very skittish about making mistakes, about doing the wrong thing, about losing her client somehow, and she is, she's very hesitant, whereas Jimmy is A, impatient, and B, very headstrong and willing to just charge into, yeah, let's hire this lady. She sounds good. And she does sound good. I think that if I'm going to be on a side here, and I think that Jimmy's being a little impulsive, okay? He is being more impulsive than he should be. But if I'm going to be on a side here, I got to be on Jimmy's side. This lady does a good job. Like, she's obviously, been to the DMV and not cracked under the pressure. She's, what we see her later handle these calls and do really good job, and she's filing for Kim. And if you're going to hire a secretary, I couldn't imagine somebody better than this. Like, she seems really legit. So he's spinning his wheels. He's ready to go hire her. And then he does, right? Like, he hires her and then he's wanting to micromanage how she answers the calls. I think that's interesting. Jimmy is working on a level of very nervous energy right now of what exactly is the word here? He's still trying to process a lot of things, I think. He's still dealing with, his falling out with Chuck and everything that Chuck said to him, and he's not in a great place. And so he's sort of trying to make his life right. He does all the things of micromanaging the phone call and saying, talk about Cracker Barrel, talk about, he gets great stuff about Cracker Barrel, by the way. And then once he's like, okay, fine, yes, I'll back off of this, he's rearranging the furniture. Like, you can tell this is a man who feels like his life is out of control. And so he's taking control wherever he can. He's taking control in the hiring of the secretary, of telling her what to do, of how to act, of how to speak, of where the furniture is set in his waiting room. All of this stuff is him trying to get back in control of this life that is increasingly spiraled out of control for him. And then, speaking of out of control, Mike calls. And I love the interaction. You don't get to see Mike's side of the phone call, but the secretary's just like, he is not interested in my Cracker Barrel small talk, okay? It tells, she mentions Ehrmantraut. Jimmy, his eyes almost light up here. I think he's a little bit afraid of Mike, but I also think that he is excited. And maybe I'm projecting here because I'm excited about Mike, but I think that Jimmy gets excited about the prospect of what Mike represents, this sort of criminal freedom that Mike has that Jimmy does not have, that Jimmy is working under the law. He's got all these strictures, and he sees Mike as this kind of pirate renegade guy who can go off and do whatever he wants to. And I think there's a part of Jimmy that very much identifies with that, that's very in tune with that idea and really wants to go that way. Not completely, but you can tell that that's sort of where his heart's at, and he's still trying to walk the line a certain amount, but it's not working out 100% for him. So Mike has a mission for him, right? He sets up Jimmy. He says, listen, I know that there's something going on with this chicken place, Las Pollos Hermanos. This guy's going to show up. He's got this kind of car. He's going to come inside at about this time. You need to be in there. You need to watch him. And so super spy Jimmy McGill makes his appearance. Wow. Is Jimmy bad at spying on people? Like, emptying salt packets into his coffee cup as he's like, you know, like leaning casually against the soda dispenser and accidentally getting soda all over his hands. It's awesome. It's incredible to see Jimmy be this bad at tailing somebody. And this, by the way, to set up the end of this, because we know, knowing the ending of this show, we know that Mike gets outsmarted, and that never happens. But I think 90% of the blame there is to be put on Jimmy's incompetence. I think if Mike had been able to get somebody who wasn't a complete doofus, or if he'd had another Mike, right? If Mike had a clone of himself that didn't look like Mike, but just had all Mike's knowledge, Mike would have been in and out, and he would have figured it out, and Los Pollos Hermanos would not have been the wiser. But he has to deal with Jimmy, and, you know, Jimmy in this scene is just a goofus. He does manage, though, to be a little bit smart. And before I get into the specifics of what Jimmy does, I do want to say, the way they reveal Gus Fring in this episode is so great, because you know he's there, right? Like, as an audience member, as somebody who's followed Breaking Bad and, you know, knows this arc, knows this character, and not everybody is. I'm sure there's some people who just watch Better Call Saul, and there's enough here for them, right? It's not like you're watching Better Call Saul and you haven't seen Breaking Bad, you don't know who Gus Fring is, and this show is terrible because you don't know who it is. But as somebody who does know Gus Fring, who does know that yellow shirt, who does know just that silhouette, the way they introduce his character, and just out of focus in the background, wiping down tables, like, you know who it is. I was squealing like a little girl, like, there's Gus Fring! Gus Fring is here! You know it, but he's not on camera yet. He walks off, and you're like, where's he at? Where's he at? Where's he at? And then Jimmy pulls his thing, or like diving headfirst into the garbage can like a moron. Could you be more conspicuous? I'm just saying, like, if you legitimately, if you tried to be more conspicuous, could you? If you walked into that restaurant wearing clown makeup and playing a one-man band, I don't think that he would have been more obvious than he was. But regardless, he gets in there. Gus Fring, you know, stops by, and Jimmy doesn't have any knowledge of Gus Fring. He doesn't have any reason to be afraid. He's just like, this is the guy who owns the restaurant. But he still comes up with a pretty convincing story. He has set it up for himself to be able to do this and be believable, or he's looking for his watch band. So I'll back off a little bit. Yeah, Jimmy, you're not completely incompetent, but you're like, you're in the yellow headed towards red on the incompetence meter. Jimmy goes outside after his little encounter. He talks to Mike. He tells him what he saw. Mike's like, go over it again, go over it again. Jimmy's like, I saw what I saw. I don't know what else you want from me. And I love this scene again because Jimmy clearly loves this work with Mike. He loves this kind of sneaking, he's bad at it, obviously, but he loves this renegade world that Mike lives in. And Mike doesn't have any time for Jimmy because he knows that it's not some romantic pirate thing that, you know, he could get killed. And he's not cool with that, and he doesn't have time for Jimmy's shenanigans. But, you know, you see Jimmy saying, hey, I cleared my morning out. We could do some stuff. Let's go find this tracker or whatever. And Mike's not having it. And the ending of the scene, again, really tips us off that Jimmy has been a buffoon, because we see Gus Fring, and he's not even looking at them, but you can tell that he's, I mean, to be fair, you just look at, anytime Gus Fring is on screen, it's like, what's he thinking? He's thinking something smart. But it seems like that he's definitely got an eye on what's going on with Jimmy. He sees the yellow esteem, as it's called, you know, pulling out, and Mike's car is there, and he's on top of things. Mike's on top of things too, or at least he thinks so. He sees somebody pick up the tracker. He, you know, Escalade squeals in, you know, tires practically smoking, picks up, pulls out again. Mike sees the tracker move, and he's on the move too. And you know, that sets up the Mike portion of this finale. Not the finale, but obviously the final episode our final scenes of this episode are both big gut punches for both of these characters. Setting up Jimmy's gut punch, we get Kim talking to Ernie, and Ernie is sort of, you know, he's been talked to by Chuck, right? Chuck gave his whole spiel about, you know, confidentiality, you can't tell anybody, and really like pounded it into the ground that he could not tell him. And at this point in the episode, we still don't know what the plan was, but Ernesto brings Kim into this. And I don't know that that was Chuck's plan. I don't think Chuck intended for Kim to get sucked into this. And I see a lot of hate for Chuck, and I get it. All right, I understand that he's doing his brother wrong. But I do want people to remember that in the story of not Breaking Bad, but in Better Call Saul, Chuck is Jimmy's nemesis. All right, but in Chuck's story, Jimmy is his nemesis. All right, Jimmy is the enemy. He's done everything wrong, and Chuck wants to make that right, and not just done everything wrong from the law's perspective. But if you remember from last season, there was Jimmy drove their parents to poverty, and their mom's dying breath was calling out for Jimmy when Jimmy had run off to get a hoagie somewhere, and Chuck laid there and listened to his mother call out for her other son who had not had the time to sit there and watch her die. And Chuck has all of this baggage. It's, again, flip this story, tell it from a different perspective, and even from the perspective they are telling it, and you understand why Chuck doesn't like Jimmy as much as he does. I don't think he understands Jimmy, and we'll get into that a little bit. I read some very interesting observations about exactly how this finale plays out, but you get where he's coming from. You get all of the baggage that Chuck has, and I don't hate Chuck. Again, I know a lot of you fans do. I understand that there is a lot of hatred for Chuck, but I think that I understand where he's coming from as a character. He's doing the wrong thing, okay? He's clearly vengeful and hateful and doing the wrong thing, but there's a moment here that is Chuck getting his win, where Chuck gets his, gut punch, victory moments that you want to see Jimmy get. And that's why, again, I don't see him as evil. I don't know that anybody in the show is evil. I think that they're all trying to figure out their own morality, and they're all willing to fudge the law, but I don't see any character in this show as the Darth Vader. And Kim goes in and tells Jimmy, hey, your brother taped you. And the look on Jimmy, the whole way this whole scene plays out is really great, because you see Jimmy realize that none of that was real. And I think, there was a moment last week where he said, for 10 minutes, Chuck didn't hate me. And this scene is him realizing, oh no, that 10 minutes was fake. Chuck did hate me for those 10 minutes. He was playing me that whole time. And it hits him like a ton of bricks. And I think the best way that you see this is the way he rolls the tape off the walls, right? In the previous episode, Chuck had shown him how to roll the tape with his thumbs, a little bit by little bit by little bit. And he's processing this as Kim comes in. She does the lawyer thing, by the way, which I think we haven't seen yet. It's interesting. We saw that in Breaking Bad, right? Which precedes this. Jimmy McGill says, put some money in my pocket. Now I'm your lawyer. Kim showed him that, I think. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. He may have done it in a previous episode, but I think that is sort of the germination of that idea, and that's kind of cool to see those little pieces fall into place for him. It's a little bit fan servicey, but the right balance of fan service, I think. But you see him pulling the tape off the wall as Kim is telling him his options and telling him what Chuck can and can't do with the tape. And he's doing the finger roll, he's doing the thumb roll, and then he gets to the final line, and he's thumb rolled it, and he's thumb rolled it, and he's thumb rolled it, and he's just he can't take it anymore, and he just rips it off. What a great way to show the pressure and the struggle between these two sides of himself that Jimmy's under. So we're obviously heading towards a big showdown between Jimmy and Chuck. But before we get there, we get Mike on the trail of the gas cap. And what an ending for Mike's little arc here, because, you know, he follows this tracker, he gets to the road, you know, he pulls over, and you see him like looking over this hill. And the way they set this up is so incredible, because you can tell that there's not quite line of sight, but it also doesn't look like there's a car down there, that there should be, like, that Escalade's a pretty big car. Mike should be able to see this Escalade. He can't see it, and he's just inching over the hill. And finally, we get this reveal of the gas cap with this cell phone on it, and the cell phone's ringing, and Mike's alone again. Mike has been played at his own game. Mike got miked, okay? What a turnabout, an amazing moment in this show to see this really, I mean, we've, not only over the course of the 3 seasons, but just in this last several episodes, we've shown Mike is very savvy and very smart, and to see him still get played here and still be outsmarted really sets up the power of Gus Fring as a character and as a manipulator here. Cliffhanger there, and then, and this is the more powerful, as I mentioned, I like to sort of talk about the emotional stuff, and they actually do end on this one here. Chuck, I should say, is set up his little trap, as we understand it now. Hamlin comes hopping over the fences, he talks to Chuck, and really they exposit, okay, here's the plan. And Chuck says, Jimmy is going to break in here. He is going to try to steal the tape. And I love that Hamlin is getting kind of fed up. We understand now why Hamlin was in on the game. Chuck needed HHM's resources and, you know, things to hire these investigators, people to watch for Jimmy to come in and steal the tape, so that there is a witness, as is the name of the episode, witness to his crime. But what is most interesting to me here is that the way this scene plays out, Chuck says he's going to sneak in, he's going to try to steal the tape. And what actually plays out is Jimmy, like, going on a screaming rampage, beating down the door, literally beating down the door, like kicking it in. And what is significant here is that Chuck has misjudged Jimmy. And this is, by the way, something I'm completely stealing from a Reddit comment, but I thought it was brilliant that they said. So credit to the thread, the post-episode discussion thread in Reddit. Someone mentioned that the moment here that Chuck is expecting is for Jimmy to come in and try to cover up and try to clean his trail, as it were, right? But what actually happens is not that. Jimmy's not, I mean, he does come in and he is pulling the tape, right? And he's yelling and he's screaming, but what he's doing is not necessarily about the tape and about the evidence. He's not concerned about the evidence. What his primary emotional driver here is now is that Chuck betrayed him. And I love that Chuck couldn't see that that was going to happen. That Chuck knew that Jimmy would come in, he knew that he would try to get the tape back, but the way, and Jimmy does, but the way it plays out is not in this subtle subterfuge, Jimmy sneaking around like Chuck thought it was going to be. It's Jimmy beating the door down and saying, you know, you betrayed me. How dare you? No wonder your wife left you, which we haven't seen yet, by the way. It would be interesting if they get to that in flashbacks this season. But, you know, and not stealing the tape, but just smashing it up and breaking it and threatening to burn Chuck's house to the ground. And I don't know how that plays out for Chuck's plan. Hamlin comes out and he says, I'm a witness. And the investigator comes out and he says, I'm a witness. And that's sort of your gut punch. But Hamlin does, I'm sorry, not Hamlin, but Chuck doesn't have Jimmy stealing the tape. Jimmy didn't steal the tape. He destroyed it, kind of, like, he broke it up. But I don't know how this plays out legally. Again, I don't know what, obviously Chuck can get Jimmy for threatening him, for threatening the destruction of his home. But I don't know if this is as strong for Chuck as he would have liked it to been because of this emotional outburst that he was not expecting. But As always with this show, man, I can't wait to see what happens next. I hope you guys are on the hook too. This season just ratchets it up even further. They've really like set the hook now, and they're just reeling us in little bit by little bit. Not too fast and not too slow, and I'm loving it. I also love it when you guys leave comments. Let me know what you thought of the episode. Let me know if I missed something or if I have misrepresented something in your opinion. I try to get back to those ASAP. So, let me know what you guys thought. That's very interesting to get your guys' thoughts as well. And I will see you guys next week with another episode of the Better Call Saul recap. Take care.